It was a busy afternoon on a crowded city bus, the kind where everyone is tired, and all anyone wants is to get home. Among the passengers was a young, visibly pregnant black woman, standing near the front, clutching the pole for support as the vehicle jolted forward. Her tired eyes scanned the rows of occupied seats, searching for even a sliver of kindness. That's when she saw him, a man in his mid-50s, sitting comfortably by the window, scrolling on his phone. She hesitated for a moment before politely asking, "Excuse me, sir, could I sit here, please?" The man didn't look up. Instead, he shifted slightly, his tone sharp and dismissive as he muttered, "Why should I? Find somewhere else." A wave of discomfort rippled through the bus as passengers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene. The woman stood frozen, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. She glanced around, hoping someone would step in, but the bus remained painfully silent. Little did the man know, someone was watching closely from a few rows behind, a person who had the power to change everything. What happened next would not only leave everyone on that bus speechless, but also spark a conversation far beyond the city streets. This story is about much more than a seat on a bus. It's about decency, empathy, and the unexpected ways people reveal their true character. Stay tuned because what unfolds will challenge what you think you know about justice, humility, and the power of standing up for what's right. The bus continued its bumpy ride, the air heavy with an awkward tension. Passengers tried to act as though they hadn't noticed the exchange, but it was impossible to ignore. The pregnant woman shifted her weight from one foot to the other, holding tightly to the pole as the bus swayed. Her discomfort was evident, but so was her resolve. She wasn't about to argue or cause a scene, even though her exhaustion was written all over her face. The man, oblivious or simply indifferent, remained in his seat, scrolling through his phone. His expression was one of irritation, as though being asked to show a little kindness was somehow an inconvenience. A few rows back, a middle-aged woman whispered to her teenage son, who nodded and looked towards the front. He seemed conflicted, like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. Then there was the observer. Dressed in casual clothes, they didn't stand out in the crowd, but their sharp eyes took in everything. The man's dismissive attitude, the woman's quiet strength, and the uneasy silence from everyone else. They shifted slightly in their seat, their fingers brushing against a small object in their pocket. The bus stopped again, and a few passengers got off, leaving a couple of empty seats. Still, the man didn't move or offer the seat beside him. The pregnant woman hesitated, glancing toward the open spots, but before she could make a decision, something unexpected happened. The observer, who had been quietly watching this whole time, finally decided it was time to act. What they did next would change the course of the day, and perhaps leave a lesson no one would forget. As the bus rattled on, the tension seemed to grow thicker. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, stealing glances at the man who refused to budge, and the pregnant woman still standing, gripping the pole with determination. Every so often, someone looked as though they might speak up, but the moment always passed, leaving the silence heavier than before. The observer leaned forward slightly, their expression calm but purposeful. They had seen situations like this before, moments where a simple act of decency could have made all the difference but was denied. It wasn't just about the seat anymore. It was about the principle, the quiet cruelty of ignoring someone who clearly needed help. Meanwhile, the pregnant woman decided to move towards one of the newly available seats further down the aisle. As she shuffled past, she murmured a quiet thank you to the young man who offered to help her balance, but she couldn't ignore the sting of humiliation. She wasn't looking for trouble, just a little kindness on a tough day. From another perspective, a woman in the back of the bus silently judged the situation. She thought of her own struggles during pregnancy and felt a pang of anger, not just at the man, but at everyone staying silent. Still, like many others, she hesitated. Was it her place to get involved? The observer's eyes followed the pregnant woman as she found a seat. They seemed to weigh their options carefully before standing. Slowly, they approached the man who had refused to move. The atmosphere on the bus grew even more tense as all eyes turned toward them. What would they say? Would they confront him directly, or was there another plan in motion? The answer would leave everyone stunned. The observer walked slowly, deliberately, the faint creak of the floor beneath their shoes, catching the attention of everyone on the bus. Conversations that had barely started fell silent as heads turned to follow the unexpected movement. The pregnant woman, now seated but still visibly uneasy, glanced up, her eyes meeting the observers for a fleeting moment. There was something in their expression, determination, perhaps, or a quiet resolve, that made her hold her breath. The man in the seat, still staring at his phone, didn't notice the figure standing just a step away. But the rest of the bus did, and the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. The observer finally spoke, their voice calm but firm, breaking through the thick silence. "Excuse me, sir," they began, their tone steady but carrying an unmistakable weight. "Did you notice that the woman you refused to help was pregnant?" The man froze, his grip tightening on his phone. He glanced up for the first time, his expression a mix of irritation and surprise. "What's it to you?" he snapped, his voice defensive but slightly uncertain. The tension surged. Passengers leaned in, some subtly, others more openly, eager to see what would happen next. The observer didn't flinch. Instead, they took a small step back, allowing their words to hang in the air. "It's about respect," they replied evenly. "Something this world needs a lot more of." For a moment, the bus felt like it was holding its breath. The man's face hardened, but before he could respond, another voice broke through the silence. A young woman from the back, her voice shaky but brave. "Yeah, it's about time someone said something." Now the energy on the bus was electric. I started back and forth between the man, the observer, and the other passengers who were slowly finding their voices. The conflict had reached its peak, and the entire bus seemed to be on edge, waiting for what would come next. The man shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier confidence cracking under the weight of the growing tension. The observers stood firm, their steady gaze unrelenting. Meanwhile, murmurs began spreading through the bus, passengers whispering to one another, emboldened by the young woman's outburst. It was as if a dam had broken, and the silence that had once blanketed the bus was now replaced by a ripple of voices. The man scoffed, attempting to shrug it off. "I don't owe anyone anything," he muttered loudly, but his voice lacked the conviction it had before. He glanced around, realizing he was no longer in control of the situation. That's when the second twist hit, one that no one saw coming. From the back of the bus, an elderly man with a cane stood up, his movements deliberate and slow. His voice was weathered but carried authority as he spoke. "Young man," he said, his words cutting through the noise, "do you know who that woman is?" The bus fell silent again, the tension thickening. The pregnant woman looked up, startled, as if she wasn't expecting to be recognized. The elderly man continued, pointing his cane toward her. "That's Dr. Robinson. She's the one who runs the community clinic, the one who helped save my granddaughter's life last year when no one else would." Guests filled the bus as recognition dawned on several faces. The observer remained still, their expression unreadable, but the pregnant woman seemed overwhelmed, shrieking slightly in her seat. The man in question looked flustered, his bravado now fully replaced by discomfort. The stakes had shifted, and now the man wasn't just a rude passenger. He was someone who had dismissed a person, quietly making a difference in the community. The bus collectively held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The bus was silent, except for the hum of the engine and the soft creak of the elderly man's cane as he steadied himself. All eyes were on the man in the seat, who now seemed unsure where to look. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. His indifference had been laid bare for everyone to see, and the revelation of the pregnant woman's identity added a layer of humiliation he hadn't anticipated. For a moment, it seemed like he might try to justify himself, but the words never came. Instead, the observer, still standing nearby, spoke again, their voice calm but pointed. Respect shouldn't depend on someone's title or accomplishments. It's about treating everyone with dignity, no matter who they are. The man shifted in his seat, his face flushed with embarrassment. Slowly, he stood up, avoiding the gazes of those around him. Without a word, he moved to another part of the bus, leaving the seat empty. The observer turned to the pregnant woman, gesturing gently toward the now vacant spot. She hesitated, her expression a mix of gratitude and unease, before finally nodding and taking the seat. Just as the bus began to move again, a soft, polite voice spoke up from the front. It was the driver. "Thank you all for sorting this out. It's good to see people standing up for what's right." The passengers, still buzzing with the weight of what had just happened, offered murmurs of agreement. But as the observer returned to their seat, someone noticed something, a small badge clipped to their bag. It read, "Community Advocate." Whispers spread as the realization dawned. This wasn't just any bystander. They had been there for a reason, quietly ensuring moments like this didn't go unchecked. The pregnant woman glanced back, meeting the observer's eyes one more time. They exchanged a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement that some acts of kindness leave lasting ripples. And as the bus rolled on, the story they had all witnessed would become a lesson no one would forget. As the bus continued its journey, a new sense of calm settled over the passengers. The tension that had filled the air was replaced by quiet reflection. The pregnant woman, now seated and resting, gazed out the window, her hands resting gently on her belly. She looked tired, but there was also a hint of peace in her expression, as though the storm had finally passed. The man who had refused to give up his seat sat in silence, avoiding eye contact with anyone. His earlier confidence had crumbled, replaced by what looked like deep thought, or perhaps regret. Whether he would change after this experience was uncertain, but he had been confronted with a truth he could no longer ignore. The observer, now seated once again, blended back into the crowd. Their presence was quiet but unmistakable, a reminder that even in small moments, there are opportunities to make a difference. Passengers exchanged occasional glances, and though no one spoke loudly, there was an unspoken understanding among them. They had all been part of something meaningful, something they would carry with them long after the ride was over. As the bus neared its final stop, the driver glanced in the rearview mirror and said, "Next time, let's all try to do the right thing without needing an audience." A few passengers chuckled softly, nodding in agreement. When the bus pulled up to the curb, the pregnant woman stood slowly, giving the observer a small, grateful smile before stepping off. The observer stayed behind, watching as she disappeared into the bustling city. Sometimes change begins in the most unexpected places: a crowded bus, a quiet confrontation, a simple act of standing up. And though the ride was over, the lessons would linger, leaving an imprint on everyone who had been there.